rain came down in sheets the night Gerald Huxley vanished. Out on Route 91, the road curved through the desolate New Mexico desert, glistening under the angry skies like a winding mirror. The only sign of life was a single set of headlights slicing through the storm. Gerald was on mile 12 of his overnight haul from El Paso to Denver, a route he had driven hundreds of times, yet tonight felt different. The CB radio crackled every few miles, but no one responded. Just silence and static, like the road had swallowed everyone else. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, eyes darting to the worn photo clipped to his dashboard. A boy of about 5 red hair tangled a goofy grin painted across his face. The word Lucas scrawled on the back in his wife's careful handwriting. Gerald had always made it home. Until that night. When the truck was found hours later parked neatly at a rest stop just off the highway, engine still ticking warm, there was no sign of Gerald. No blood. No struggle. Just a hot cup of coffee sitting calmly in the cup holder and the driver's seat pushed slightly too far back. Lucas Huxley was born the year his father vanished. He never knew the man beyond the faded stories his mother told or the lonely photographs that lingered on mantels and in forgotten albums. Gerald became a ghost in the family's narrative, a presence more myth than memory. Lucas grew up in Roswell, a quiet kid, fascinated with machines, especially trucks. He learned to rebuild engines before he could legally drive. At 28, he ran his own mechanic shop out of a converted barn near the same stretch of highway where his father disappeared. People liked to bring their rigs to Lucas. They said he had a way of listening to an engine like it was speaking a language only he understood. On a sticky July morning, Lucas purchased an old long-haul truck from a salvage auction out in Alamogordo. It was rusted and tired, a 1981 Mack Superliner with peeling red paint and a haunted air about it. He didn't recognize it at first, not until he found the serial plate. Not until the VIN numbers made his breath hitch. It was his father's truck. The discovery hit him with the weight of a steel chain. For years, the rig had been written off, chopped up its parts scattered across junkyards like fragments of a forgotten story, but somehow, impossibly, it had resurfaced, and now it was his. Lucas spent the first week working on it, obsessively stripping it down, cleaning away the decay of decades. He told himself it was about closure, about reclaiming a part of his father. But as he worked, the truck seemed to resist him like it was hiding something. Screws rusted tight in unnatural ways. Panels sealed with strange adhesives. There was a stubbornness in the bones of the vehicle, like it didn't want to be opened. Still, Lucas pushed on, losing sleep, skipping meals. He needed answers. Needed to feel like there was a purpose to his father's disappearance. Otherwise, the hole Gerald left behind would always be just that, a hole, empty, mocking. Then, on a stormy Thursday evening that mirrored the night Gerald vanished, Lucas removed the glove box. Behind it, wedged between layers of brittle foam insulation and wire, he found it. A small sealed envelope. Duct-taped flat against the inner wall, yellowed at the edges and marked in faded ink for Lucas. Only if I don't come back. Lucas stared at it for a long time before peeling it free. His fingers trembled. He sat in the driver's seat, the cab silent except for the patter of rain on the roof, and opened it. Inside was not a letter. Not at first. It was a drawing. A child's drawing, clearly done in crayon. A stick figure boy with red hair stood next to a taller figure, both smiling under a sun with crooked rays. On the back, a single line, "He's not yours, but you are his." Lucas froze. The air in the cab thickened. This wasn't what he expected. It wasn't closure. It was a riddle. And it was only just beginning. Beneath the drawing was a folded note, brittle and smudged. The handwriting matched the one on the envelope, sharp and deliberate. Lucas read it slowly. "If you found this, then I'm gone. I tried to keep you out of it, but the truth has a way of clawing its way out of the ground. You'll have questions. I can't answer them all here. But the key is Santa Fe. Look for G.H. Harris. Start there. That's where I stopped being Gerald. That's where everything unraveled." Lucas reread the note 3 times. Each time it made less sense. G.H. Harris, Santa Fe. Who was this other child? And what did his father mean by saying Lucas wasn't his but was someone else's? The world tilted. Everything Lucas thought he knew was now under question. But in that moment, sitting behind the same wheel his father last touched, he made a decision. He would go to Santa Fe. He would follow the trail no matter how long it had been cold. Because some ghosts don't rest until someone listens. The next morning, Lucas closed up the shop early. He packed light, just a duffel bag, a flashlight, and a notebook. He fueled up his truck, not his father's rig, but the one he trusted on long roads. As he passed the old Mac on his way out, he paused. For a second, he swore he saw something shift behind the windshield. A trick of the light, he told himself, just nerves. But it lingered, like the rig was watching him leave. The drive to Santa Fe was quiet. Miles of open road, the kind of silence that hums just beneath the roar of tires on asphalt. Lucas played no music. He needed to think, to remember every story his mother had told, to scan for clues he might have missed. The note said the key was in Santa Fe, and that was where Gerald stopped being Gerald. That meant something. It had to. As the New Mexico sun dipped below the mountains, casting long shadows across the landscape, Lucas reached the edge of Santa Fe. He pulled into a faded motel on the outskirts of town, the kind with flickering neon signs and half-empty parking lots. He didn't sleep much. The questions wouldn't let him. And as the moon climbed high and the air turned sharp, Lucas stared out the motel window at the empty highway beyond. Somewhere out there, buried in dust and time, was the rest of the story, and he was going to find it. Even if it meant digging into secrets his father died trying to bury. The morning air in Santa Fe was dry and sharp, filled with the scent of sun-baked clay and cedarwood smoke drifting from nearby chimneys. Lucas stepped out of the motel room with his boots crunching the gravel beneath his feet. He had not slept much, but there was a strange clarity that settled in his mind. The envelope still sat in the passenger seat of his truck, and with it the name G.H. Harris. He had no idea where to begin looking for someone who may have vanished even longer ago than his father, but if the name was meant to guide him, it had to exist somewhere in the records of this quiet city. Lucas made his way to the city's public library, a brick structure that looked more like a museum than a source of information. Inside, it smelled of paper and dust and quiet desperation. He requested access to local directories from the 1980s. The name G.H. Harris did appear. Not often, but just enough to give him a thread to pull. The earliest mention of G.H. Harris was in a 1984 city tax document listing a P.O. box near the outskirts of town. The address belonged to a now-closed freight company that had operated under a shell name, Horizon Logistics. Lucas's hands tightened on the photocopy as he stared at the faded listing. Something about it felt intentional, like the breadcrumbs were always there, waiting for someone to care enough to follow. He drove to the location noted in the file. The building had long been gutted, its outer walls scorched by time and graffiti. The parking lot was broken by weeds and cracked pavement. Still, Lucas wandered through the shell of what remained eyes, tracing every bolt and beam, looking for anything that felt like a lead. In a corner office behind a rotting desk, he found a drawer that refused to open all the way. He tugged and twisted until the wood gave way. Tucked in the back was a weather-warped invoice. The paper was barely legible, but it carried the company's old seal and a handwritten signature, Gerald Huxley. Lucas sat on the floor for a long moment as wind howled through the broken windows. His father had been here. Not just a ghost on paper, but a real presence in this building. The invoice detailed a shipment logged in 1986. The destination had been redacted with black marker, but a reference code remained untouched. Code 19SW14. Lucas pocketed the page and left the building heart-pounding. That reference code felt like the kind of thing police or freight companies would use to mark sensitive deliveries. He called in a favor from an old friend named Ray, who worked at a logistics hub in Albuquerque. They had not spoken in a while, but Ray owed Lucas a few from back when they were wrenching engines together. Lucas emailed him a scanned copy of the code and waited in a diner nearby nursing black coffee and watching a group of elderly locals play cards in silence. Ray responded within 2 hours. The code was flagged in a long-defunct national shipping ledger. It had been part of a run commissioned by a government contractor under a fake company umbrella. According to Ray, anything listed under 19 SW protocols was categorized as restricted cargo. Whatever it was, it had moved between several states and had never been marked as delivered. Lucas felt his stomach knot. The discovery tilted the story into a new direction. His father had not just vanished, he had been moving something dangerous or classified, and then he had stopped being Gerald. Why would a trucker hide his identity after such a run unless something had gone terribly wrong? The next morning, Lucas visited the county records office to pull property deeds associated with Horizon Logistics. Buried in old files and microfiche rolls, he found a land listing under the name Gerald H. Harris, filed in April of 1986. The property was listed as rural land southwest of the city near the foothills. No construction permits had ever been issued, and the taxes had gone unpaid since the early 1990s. Lucas made a copy of the coordinates and left. The sun was high when he reached the edge of the property. The road ended abruptly, giving way to scrub and loose rock. He hiked the last half-mile on foot. His boots kicked up clouds of fine dust as he navigated the incline. What he found was not a home or a bunker. It was a truck chassis. Just the frame, half buried under a blanket of sand and time. Lucas crouched beside the rusted shell, brushing away the dirt. He recognized the make immediately. It was another Mack rig identical to his father's. Only this one had been stripped gutted and left to die in the desert. It was too close to be a coincidence. He checked the undercarriage fingers moving with muscle memory. Taped to the inside of the frame was a small plastic capsule. Lucas opened it and found another note. This one was shorter, shakier. It read, "If they find this, I was never here. If you find it, the rest is with the boy." Lucas turned the paper over. No name. No clue who the boy was. But the weight of those words sank like stones in his chest. Somewhere, in this tangle of clues, was another child, someone connected to the night Gerald vanished. And whoever he was, he carried the rest of the story. Lucas returned to the motel as twilight descended. The city buzzed in the distance, a faint hum under the dying light. He laid out every document, every photo, and every note across the motel bed. The pieces were there. G.H. Harris, Horizon Logistics, the sealed shipment, the abandoned truck in the foothills, and now a child. A boy who may have held the key to it all. He did not know where to look next, but he knew one thing for certain. His father had gone to extreme lengths to leave these clues, which meant the truth was not just important, it was dangerous, and it had waited long enough. The following day, Lucas returned to the Santa Fe library with a renewed sense of urgency. He could not shake the image of that stripped truck frame rusting beneath the desert sun. Every clue pointed to something bigger than a missing father or a sealed envelope. There was now the mention of a boy cryptically tied to a second life his father had lived under the name G.H. Harris. Lucas decided to search for local archives of missing persons or adoption records from the 1980s. If his father had been hiding with a child, that child might have once belonged to someone else, or worse, might have vanished just like Gerald. The librarian, a woman in her 60s with silver hair tucked behind her ears, helped him access newspaper archives and hospital logs. Lucas scanned the microfilm with dry eyes and sore hands. Nothing stood out until he reached a 1987 issue of the Santa Fe Chronicle. It showed a blurry image of a young boy clinging to a deputy's arm. The headline read, "Unidentified child found near abandoned freight yard." He looked no older than 4. Lucas printed the article and stared at the photo in silence. The boy's face was partially obscured by dirt and shadows, but something about his expression caught Lucas by the throat. It was not just fear, it was knowing. The article stated that the child had been found wandering alone near the old Horizon Logistics depot, dehydrated and silent. He did not speak for days. Authorities never identified him. He had been placed in foster care under the name Daniel given by the nurse who first treated him. There were no further articles about Daniel, no follow-up, no adoption notice, no trail. It was as if he had been erased. Lucas felt a chill in his spine. Could this boy be the same one referenced in the note? If so, why had his father been near the site when the child was found? Lucas returned to his motel and pinned the printed article to the wall. It was a grainy photograph, but it suddenly became the center of the web he was spinning. That evening, Lucas made a call to an old contact from his brief stint working with a transport union in Arizona. The contact Martin had worked on government subcontract logistics in the 80s and occasionally dealt with restricted cargo designations. Lucas emailed him the reference code and the article. Martin promised to call back the next day. With nothing left to do, Lucas wandered to a nearby diner. The waitress served him a plate of dry toast and eggs with a smile that never reached her eyes. He thanked her but barely touched the food. His thoughts circled the same image. A child left near a freight yard, his father's name tied to the same location, and a message hidden inside a truck frame suggesting that someone else had lived to carry the rest of the secret. The deeper he went, the more Lucas felt like a trespasser in someone else's story. Yet the need to know pressed down on him like the desert heat outside. That night, Lucas dreamed of the boy. In the dream, the child stood at the edge of the desert, staring at the horizon. Behind him, a truck burned slowly, flames flickering against the backdrop of endless sand. Lucas tried to call out, but no sound escaped his mouth. The boy turned eyes, hollow lips moving without a voice. Lucas woke before dawn, drenched in sweat. He sat upright, breathing hard. The motel room was still and silent, the only sound the whir of the ceiling fan spinning lazily above. He got dressed quickly and drove back to the freight yard. Something inside him urged a second look. When he arrived, the sun had just begun to rise, casting long shadows across the ruin of broken concrete and rusted metal. He walked through the wreckage, slowly letting his eyes scan every surface. On a piece of crumbling wall near the former dispatch center, he saw it. A child's drawing, scrawled in faded red chalk. It was nearly washed away by time and rain, but the outline remained. The image showed two stick figures, one larger, one small. Next to them was a crude sketch of a truck and a sun in the corner. Lucas traced the lines with his fingers. He took a photo and returned to town. He sent the image to Martin along with another message. He told him everything he had found. An hour later, Martin called. His voice was low and cautious. He told Lucas that the code had been linked to a covert transfer project. Unofficial, but real. Government documents described it as a biosensitive recovery op. Something was transported in those trucks, something that was never supposed to surface. Lucas asked if people involved had been tracked or silenced. Martin hesitated, then said that the files had references to witnesses relocated under modified IDs. Sometimes, children were placed into the system to bury connections. Lucas thanked him and ended the call. He now believed the boy was one of those witnesses, someone his father had tried to protect. Lucas decided to search through foster system records. It would not be easy. Most of those were sealed, especially if tied to confidential government activity. He spent the rest of the day contacting local social workers and old administrative centers that might have handled emergency child placements in the late 80s. Most calls went nowhere. Then he reached a woman named Martha Stillwell, a retired intake coordinator who had worked in Santa Fe for 30 years. Her voice was soft but alert. She remembered the boy. She said he was called Daniel, just like the article. But the odd thing was, the boy had been transferred out of the Santa Fe system under a special designation. She remembered the paperwork. It had a federal seal and was processed unusually fast. Within 3 weeks of being found, the boy was gone. No one ever followed up. Lucas felt the ground shifting under his feet again. He asked Martha if she knew where the boy had been sent. She said the documents might still be in the archives if they had not been purged. She offered to meet him at the county records warehouse. Lucas drove there immediately. When he arrived, the building loomed quiet and gray against the afternoon sky. Martha waited outside with a keyring in her hand and a bundle of old files pressed to her chest. They searched for an hour, then in a file marked Transitional Youth 1987 they found it. A redacted form with a shipping designation, 3 initials, and a handwritten note, Guardian, approved transfer to Missouri. That was all. But it was enough. Lucas now had a new destination. And maybe, just maybe, the name of the boy. The drive to Missouri cut through plains and rolling hills each mile, grinding beneath Lucas's tires like the slow unspooling of a long-hidden thread. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, framed by green pastures and rust-colored barns, but his mind remained back in that dusty archive in Santa Fe. The name Daniel, the sealed transfer, the federal stamp. Every clue pointed to something heavy, something shadowed by years of silence. He arrived in Jefferson City by late afternoon, a modest town with aging brick buildings and streetlights that flickered to life as dusk settled over the horizon. Lucas parked outside a regional foster care office, now converted into a community outreach center. He stared at the building, knowing most of the people inside would have no idea what took place decades ago, yet hoping anyone had held on to a sliver of the past. Inside, the air smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. A receptionist greeted Lucas with a tired smile, but it was a woman in her 50s, sorting forms at a copier, who caught his attention. Her badge read Angela M. Hart. When Lucas introduced himself and mentioned the name Daniel and the year 1987, her posture stiffened. She lowered the stack of papers and asked him to repeat the year. When he did, she nodded slowly. She remembered the case. Not the boy exactly, but the way the transfer had happened. Unusual, she said. The file was handled by an out-of-state liaison, federal clearance. No court hearing, no family visits. Just one day the boy arrived, and then 2 weeks later he was gone. She believed he had been placed in a private foster home, not through the usual system, but she could not confirm where. Her voice carried an undertone of unease, as if even mentioning it might stir something best left buried. Lucas asked if any records might remain. Angela said that only adoption summaries would still exist, most likely in county archives under limited access. He drove to the records division located in a limestone building tucked behind the courthouse. After hours of explaining and waiting, he was allowed to review partial records from the year in question under supervision. Row after row of yellowing folders filled the small search room. Lucas's eyes burned as he scanned each one, praying for a connection. Then, under the letter D, he found a folder labeled Daniel H. Age 5 Placement Confirmed July 1987. It listed a family, the Wards, a couple named Margaret and Dennis Ward. Lucas scribbled the address and license number listed. The home was in the small rural town of Warsaw, Missouri, less than 2 hours away. He left before dawn the next morning. The road wound through dense forests and scattered lakes, the kind of land where neighbors were miles apart and privacy stretched for acres. When he reached the Ward property, he found a modest farmhouse at the end of a gravel lane. The white paint was peeling, and an old swing creaked in the breeze from a porch beam. Lucas parked near the gate, heart thudding. He knocked once, then again. An elderly man answered back, slightly hunched his eyes, cautious. Lucas introduced himself and asked about Daniel. The man studied him for a moment, then stepped outside and closed the door behind him. He said Daniel had lived with them for only a year. He was quiet, deeply withdrawn, but intelligent. He liked puzzles. Never spoke about where he came from, but sometimes had nightmares that left him screaming until morning. Lucas asked where Daniel had gone. The old man said that a government vehicle had come one morning with new paperwork. No explanation. Just a signature and a promise that Daniel was going somewhere safe. Margaret had cried for days after. They never saw the boy again. Lucas felt frustration boil in his chest. Another dead end. Another disappearance buried under official silence. As he turned to leave, the man paused and mentioned one last thing. Daniel had left behind a shoebox. A box he had refused to open for the entire year he stayed there. The man had kept it in the attic. If Lucas wanted it, he could take it. Minutes later, Lucas stood holding the dust-covered box, unsure whether to open it in the driveway or wait until he reached his motel. He chose to wait. Back in the motel room, Lucas placed the box on the bed. He opened it slowly. Inside were scraps of lined paper covered in crayon drawings, some childish, others strangely detailed. One showed a truck, another what looked like a storage yard with tiny stick figures. One page simply had the word "help" written over and over. At the bottom of the box, under a small teddy bear, he found a Polaroid photo. Two men stood near a rig. One was clearly Gerald. The other had his face turned slightly, but Lucas could see the faint shape of a federal badge clipped to his belt. On the back of the photo, in blocky handwriting, it said, "He promised I would be safe. Tell Lucas the name is Grant." Lucas leaned back in the chair, his mind racing. Daniel had tried to leave a trail. Even at that age, something inside him had known the truth needed to survive. He took the Polaroid and scanned the face of the man next to his father, Grant. The name meant nothing to Lucas yet, but it gave the mystery a pulse again. He had a new direction, a face to find. And he believed Grant was still out there. If he had made a promise to keep Daniel safe, then he knew what the child had witnessed. And maybe, just maybe, he knew what had really happened to Gerald. Lucas reached for his phone and began searching federal databases for employees named Grant connected to logistics or child protection programs in the late 1980s. The name was common, but one stood out: Harold Grant, former Department of Transportation supervisor with temporary clearance on contracted shipments, retired in 1993. Last known address was listed in a place Lucas had not expected: Southern Illinois, a town called Carbondale. Lucas gathered the files, the photo, and the box. He booked a room halfway between Warsaw and Carbondale. He did not know what answers waited in Illinois, but he was certain of one thing. If Harold Grant had been there that day with his father and Daniel, then he was not just a bystander. He was part of the secret, and he had watched it unfold in real time. The drive into southern Illinois carried the weight of expectation. The landscape shifted again, this time to gentle hills and thickets of bare-limbed trees pressing against the highway. Lucas felt every mile like a countdown. He had Grant's name, a faded photo, and a possible address. That was more than he had started with. Carbondale lay ahead, a quiet college town known for its university and long winters. Lucas arrived just past noon. He found the neighborhood tucked in a wooded pocket on the edge of town where driveways curved up into quiet yards and mailboxes leaned with age. The address listed for Harold Grant matched a modest one-story brick home with a rusting mailbox and a cracked cement walkway. The house was still. No cars in the drive. Lucas rang the bell and waited. No answer. He rang again, then knocked. A curtain stirred in the side window. Someone was home. Lucas waited, unsure what to do next. After a few moments, the door opened just enough to reveal a pale eye peeking through the crack. A thin voice asked what he wanted. Lucas explained who he was and mentioned his father's name. The door remained partially closed, but the voice told him to come back at dusk. That was all. Lucas returned to his truck and parked a block away. He waited, sipping coffee from a gas station cup and watching the house through the windshield. At sunset, he returned. This time, the door opened wider. The man behind it was in his 70s, stooped but alert. He wore a wool sweater and clutched the edge of the doorframe as though it grounded him. He asked Lucas to leave his phone in the mailbox before entering. Lucas hesitated, then obeyed. Inside, the air was stale and heavy with old dust. The furniture was clean, but sparse, as if it had not been changed in years. Grant motioned for Lucas to sit in a chair opposite an old wood-burning stove. He lowered himself slowly into a recliner and stared at Lucas for a long time before speaking. Grant said he remembered Gerald. He remembered the shipment. He remembered the night it all began to unravel. It was supposed to be a simple transfer, unmarked crates. A convoy of 3 trucks. Gerald had driven the lead. But something happened en route. Gerald called him from a payphone and said he was pulling out. Said there was something wrong with the cargo. Said one of the crates had shifted and broken open. That was when everything changed. Lucas listened without interrupting. Grant explained that 2 of the drivers disappeared shortly after. Their families received hush payments. Gerald went off the grid. The agency in charge, a branch within a contracted military division, erased the file trail. Grant had been pulled in for questioning, then quietly retired. He moved to Carbondale, changed numbers, kept low. He said that years later a woman came asking about Gerald. She had a child with her. Red-haired, quiet, she left no name. Just asked him to stay quiet. She said Gerald had saved the boy and that silence was safer for everyone. Grant never heard from her again. Lucas pulled the Polaroid from his jacket and handed it to Grant. The old man stared at it for a long time before nodding. He said the photo had been taken the day they met in Albuquerque, hours before Gerald vanished. Grant never saw him after that. He admitted he had heard rumors that Gerald had stashed something important. Not documents, but a person. A witness, someone who had seen what came out of that broken crate. Lucas asked if it was Daniel. Grant said he believed so, but he never learned what the boy saw. Gerald must have told him something. Lucas asked what was inside the crate. Grant's eyes lowered. He said the official manifest read as biological transport, but off the record the whispers said it was experimental. Something recovered from a conflict zone overseas. Human, altered, not fully explained. Lucas sat back overwhelmed. Every step brought darker implications. He asked Grant why he was willing to talk now. Grant answered simply. He had been waiting for someone to come looking. He was tired of silence, and he was certain he would not live much longer. Before Lucas left, Grant gave him a single item, a locker key. He said Gerald had given it to him with instructions to hand it off if the truth ever came knocking. Grant never used it. The locker was located in Springfield. Lucas took the key, thanked him, and left. The cold air outside felt sharper now, like the world had changed shape. Lucas drove north that night, unable to rest. Springfield was 3 hours away. He arrived just past midnight and checked into a roadside inn. The next morning he visited the bus station listed on the key tag. The clerk on duty pointed him to a row of long-term lockers. Lucas inserted the key into box 117. It opened with a reluctant click. Inside was a faded canvas bag. He lifted it gently and unzipped it. The first thing he saw was a notebook. Handwritten. The name on the inside cover read Gerald Huxley. The pages were filled with entries. Some were technical, others personal. One section described the night of the broken crate in haunting detail. Gerald wrote that the child had witnessed something not even the adults could comprehend. That whatever had emerged from that container had not behaved like anything human. That it moved wrong, sounded wrong, and then it disappeared. The next pages were frantic. Gerald described hiding the boy, moving from place to place, changing names, destroying documents. He wrote that the child began to draw pictures he could not explain, places they had never seen. Symbols that matched no known language. Gerald feared the child had retained more than memory. He hinted at something transferred, something psychic or deeper. He never used the word possession, but the entries became increasingly erratic. He wrote that he had to leave the boy with strangers, that someone would come, that if Lucas ever found the book he should not follow the rest, he should burn it. Lucas closed the notebook with shaking hands. He placed it back in the bag and sat alone on the station bench, the locker door still ajar. Lucas did not burn the notebook. Instead, he read through it again in the cold morning light that filtered through the bus station windows. The words were more erratic the further he went. Gerald had shifted from documenting events to asking questions into the void. He questioned the nature of what he had seen. He wondered if memory alone could alter a person. There were references to nightmares shared between him and the boy, images that echoed each other despite being unsaid. Lucas stared at the pages filled with drawings. Some were of the truck. Others showed a figure that lacked shape but always stood under a dark arch. One sketch showed the boy with black eyes. Gerald had circled the image and written the words, "Sometimes he does not blink." Lucas felt the notebook grow heavier in his hands as if the ink had weight. He took photos of every page and zipped the bag shut. There was more to find. Gerald's notes hinted at a doctor, someone who had seen the boy after the incident, someone named C. Wexler. Lucas searched every database he could access: medical registries, state archives, old hospital directories. Finally, he found a doctor, Calvin Wexler, retired psychiatrist, formerly stationed at a child trauma center in Denver. The dates matched. Lucas drove west, following the same route his father had taken in the other direction decades ago. The highway stretched through bare fields and wind-bent grass. He passed through towns that barely registered on the map, the silence of the road matching the unease in his chest. When he arrived in Denver, he found Wexler's address through a public listing. The building was part of a retirement village, quiet and manicured. Lucas hesitated before knocking on the door. A nurse answered. She said Dr. Wexler did not receive visitors often, but after Lucas showed her the notebook and explained he was the son of Gerald Huxley, she allowed him inside. Wexler sat in a sunlit room surrounded by books. His posture was fragile, but his eyes remained sharp. He recognized Gerald's name immediately. He said Gerald had brought the boy in without a name, just a folded paper with emergency intake written on it. The boy was 5, unresponsive. No injuries, but clear signs of dissociation. Wexler had spent 6 sessions with him over a period of 10 days. He said the child never spoke, but he drew constantly. Sometimes pages and pages without rest. Always the same symbols, always the same places. Wexler said it disturbed the staff. No one could identify the images, but several of the symbols matched ones found in ancient carvings that Wexler had studied as a young man. He claimed he had once sent samples to a university linguist who refused to reply after reviewing them. When Lucas asked what he thought the drawings meant, Wexler paused. He said he believed the boy was remembering something that was not supposed to be remembered. Lucas handed Wexler one of the copied pages from Gerald's notebook, the one with the figure standing beneath the arch. Wexler nodded slowly. He said the boy had drawn that figure too. He referred to it in one of his written notes as the watcher in the sky below. Lucas asked what that meant. Wexler admitted he never knew, but the phrase haunted him. He had never seen a child carry so much fear without speaking. He said after the final session, Gerald had returned with a different identity and asked for the files. Wexler gave them to him without question. It was clear Gerald was desperate. Wexler had not heard from him since. Lucas thanked him and stood to leave. Before he reached the door, Wexler called out. He said the boy had drawn one last image before he left. It was a map, a place Wexler could never find. But now, he said maybe Lucas could. Lucas studied the drawing later that night in his motel room. The map was crude, but a river cut through the sketch and a ridgeline formed the backdrop. A series of dots marked something buried. Lucas cross-referenced topographic charts and realized the landscape resembled an area in Nevada, a place near Groom Lake. It was federal land now, restricted, but it had not always been. Gerald had marked it once in his notebook with a single phrase, where it began. Lucas packed his things. He was going to Nevada. He drove through the empty highways across state lines and into the hard edge of the desert. The land grew flat and unforgiving. Eventually, he reached the outer fence of the restricted zone. He parked a half-mile from the main access road and hiked the rest. His boots crunched over gravel. The sun pressed down like a weight. He found the ridge after 2 hours of walking. The land sloped into a narrow canyon. There were no signs, no markers, but the geography matched the map. Lucas followed the base of the canyon until he reached a dry riverbed. There, beneath a curved outcropping of stone, he found it. A patch of disturbed earth, recently dug. He dropped to his knees and began to clear the dust. His fingers struck metal, a box. He unearthed it and opened the lid. Inside was another notebook sealed in plastic, another drawing, and a photograph. The drawing showed the figure again, but this time it was surrounded by shadows with open mouths. The photo was of the boy, older now, maybe 16, his eyes were shut, but beneath them a strange mark was inked across his skin. Lucas stared at the image for a long time. The new notebook had fewer entries. They were written in a hand Lucas did not recognize. The pages spoke of dreams, of voices of a place below the desert, not physical, not visible, a place seen only when the boy slept. The entries called it the echo chamber. Lucas closed the notebook and looked at the canyon walls. The shadows stretched longer now. There was no wind, only the steady throb of silence. He placed the items back in the box and stood. His mind burned with questions, but beneath the questions something else stirred. A sense of being watched, as if the desert itself remembered, as if the echo chamber had never truly closed. Lucas returned from the canyon before sunrise, dust covering his boots and the metal box gripped tightly in his hand. The desert had swallowed the light by the time he reached his truck. As he drove away, he glanced in the rearview mirror and thought he saw something move where no wind had stirred. Back in town, he found a motel room on the outskirts, the kind favored by travelers who never gave their names. He placed the second notebook on the small wooden desk, careful not to damage the plastic that sealed it. Every page he turned felt like peeling back another layer of reality. The language inside shifted between memory and dream, grounded facts dissolving into surreal descriptions. The writer spoke of voices that did not echo, but bled through sleep, humming from beneath the earth like songs half-remembered. The echo chamber was not just metaphor, it was a place that responded. Lucas read aloud one of the lines and immediately felt a shiver crawl up his spine. The room grew colder. His breath frosted the mirror. He stopped reading. Something had changed. He stepped outside, letting the night air clear his head. He walked to the end of the parking lot, stood beneath a flickering street lamp, and tried to shake off the sensation that something was listening. The phrase from the notebook repeated in his head. The sound beneath is not heard by the ears, but by the bones. He returned to the room, locked the door, and slid the box under the bed. He knew he needed more than just fragments. He needed someone who could interpret what he had found. Someone who understood the symbols Daniel had drawn and the strange language in the entries. He searched online for researchers connected to ancient linguistics, preferably ones with experience in psychological symbolism or mythic languages. A name came up repeatedly. Dr. Helena Marrow, a retired academic who once specialized in comparative script studies. She lived near Reno. Lucas sent her a message that night with attached images of the drawings. Her response came early the next morning. The message was short. She wrote that the symbols were not random and that she had seen 2 of them before. She included an address and said to come immediately. Lucas drove north into Nevada, the rising sun casting long shadows across the highway. Reno shimmered in the distance by early afternoon. Dr. Marrow's home stood at the edge of the city, perched against a rocky hill. The house was old, but sturdy windows shuttered against the glare. She greeted him at the door, tall and sharp-eyed, with the kind of presence that made Lucas feel like she saw through him. He handed her the notebooks, both Gerald's and the one found in the canyon. She moved with precision, flipping pages quickly and murmuring under her breath. Finally, she pointed to one of the symbols repeated in both books. It resembled a spiral wrapped around a single eye. She said it was not just a symbol. It was an echo sign, a mark found in Sumerian artifacts connected to dream rites. She explained that some ancient cultures believed in places where consciousness bled through physical boundaries, what they called thin places. These were not imaginary. They were recorded in ceremonial tablets, always with warnings. The symbol Lucas found had been carved into stone tablets buried in a collapsed temple in Syria, tablets that Helena had studied 2 decades ago. She said she believed the boy Daniel had somehow accessed one of these thin places during the original incident, not by choice but by exposure. And once something passed through with him, it stayed. She asked Lucas if the boy was still alive. Lucas said he did not know. She stared at him for a long moment and then said if Daniel was alive, he was not just a person anymore. He was a doorway. They spent hours discussing the language in the notebooks. Helena said the structure resembled what she called reverse recursion, a form of written reflection where the meanings only revealed themselves when read backward through certain emotional filters. She had never seen a living person use it fluently. Lucas asked if she had any idea where the chamber itself could be located. She said it might not be physical, but if it ever manifested, it would do so near places that had been altered by trauma and repetition. He asked her if such a place existed in the U.S. She nodded and said there had been rumors among military anthropologists of sites in Montana where similar symbols had appeared. Lucas checked the notebooks again. Gerald had once scribbled the words "near the divide" in the margin beside one of Daniel's drawings. It might have been a clue. He thanked Helena and left as the sun began to dip again. He drove north through the endless dusk. The mountains grew closer, the roads more narrow. Lucas stopped in a small town called Jordan, the last marked place before the vast stretches of national forest. He checked into a room above a closed diner and spent the night reviewing every photo note and recording he had gathered. The pieces formed a loose map, but more than that, they formed a pattern. Every person connected to Daniel had described hearing or sensing something not seen, something that lived in silence. In the still hours before dawn, Lucas finally saw what the pattern suggested. The chamber was not buried. It moved. It followed memory and intention. Wherever Daniel had gone, it had gone with him, and Lucas was following not a place, but a path etched by the boy's changing mind. In the morning, Lucas began the hike toward the western edge of the forest range using the last coordinates noted in Gerald's journal. He packed only essentials and left his truck hidden behind a ranger station. The forest swallowed sound. Pines towered above their tips, swaying in a wind he could not feel. After several miles, the path narrowed and dipped into a ravine. There, tucked between two boulders, Lucas found another marker. A small circle of stones, each etched with one of the symbols. In the center, a metal tag. It read, Daniel H., 1996. Lucas crouched down and touched the stones. They were warm. The forest around him remained still. He felt it again, the low vibration behind his ribs, the same one he felt when reading aloud from the notebook. The sound beneath. He closed his eyes and listened. This was the edge, not just of land, but of something else. Lucas knelt beside the stone circle, hands trembling as he traced each etched mark. The air around him had shifted. The silence no longer felt passive. It pressed against his skin like a living thing. He stood slowly, eyes scanning the tree line. There were no trails beyond the marker, only brush and thick pine. But he sensed direction. Not in any physical way, but like his bones leaned toward something. He moved deeper into the forest, stepping carefully over roots and fallen limbs. The wind stilled as if the forest held its breath. The light filtered strangely through the trees, colors washing pale and then sharp again. Lucas kept moving until he reached a shallow basin surrounded by jagged rock formations. In the center was a clearing with soil darker than the rest. He stepped into the circle and felt it immediately. The low frequency, the hum in his chest, the sound beneath. He dropped to his knees and listened. No birds, no insects, just that persistent vibration pulsing like a second heartbeat. He closed his eyes and remembered the line from the notebook. The echo chamber opens when the mind forgets it is separate. He emptied his thoughts and focused on the pull in his ribs. A memory rose unbidden. His father's face, not as a photograph, but as a living man, tired and watchful, standing over him. Then another image. A boy with red hair staring at something behind Lucas, eyes wide not with fear, but recognition. A crack split the silence, sharp and sudden. Lucas opened his eyes. The soil had shifted beneath him. A narrow slit in the earth had appeared just wide enough to crawl through. The darkness within it felt heavy, not cold, but dense. He reached for his flashlight and began to descend. The tunnel sloped sharply damp, and narrow walls lined with mineral streaks that glimmered faintly. He moved slowly, the beam from his flashlight bouncing off uneven stone. The air grew cooler. Not stale, but still. He had the sense he was passing through something untouched by time. After several yards, the passage widened into a cavern. The ceiling arched above him naturally formed, but the walls bore marks that were unmistakably carved. Symbols again. Some familiar from Daniel's drawings, others new but similar in design. Lucas stepped further inside. In the center of the chamber stood a raised stone platform. Upon it lay a single object, a folded cloth. He approached cautiously and unwrapped it. Inside was another photograph. Daniel, again older now, perhaps 18. This time he was smiling, but the eyes still held that same distance. Behind him in the photo stood Lucas's father, Gerald. He looked older than when he vanished, but very much alive. Lucas sank to the ground, heart hammering. Gerald had lived. Long enough to appear in this photograph. Long enough to still be with Daniel at that age. The photo was recent by comparison. No date, no location, but the background was this chamber. Lucas looked up and realized the same symbols from the cave wall appeared faintly behind them in the photo. He turned it over. One sentence had been written there in his father's hand. "We are not lost, just moved sideways." Lucas exhaled slowly, then leaned against the wall. The weight of what he was learning felt unbearable. Gerald had not only survived, he had remained hidden, and somehow he had continued to protect Daniel. Lucas stared at the chamber's walls again. They did not feel like shelter, they felt like a membrane. He walked the perimeter slowly, fingers brushing the etchings. When he touched one particular symbol, it pulsed under his hand, not visually, but in sensation. It resonated like a tuning fork struck just once. He pressed his hand flat against it and closed his eyes. The hum intensified. Behind his lids, color bloomed. A landscape formed. Vast, empty, with a darkened sky and a horizon that curved too steeply. Shapes moved in the distance. Not people, not animals, just forms. He heard his name whispered in a voice he knew, his father's voice. Then silence. He opened his eyes and staggered back. The symbol continued to pulse. Not in sound now, but in heat. Lucas removed his jacket. The mark was still glowing faintly on the stone. It reminded him of a door slightly ajar, a veil thin enough to press through. He did not know if it would open again, but something told him this was how they had crossed, not by vehicle, not by force, by resonance. He reached into his bag and removed Daniel's last notebook. He opened it to the final entry. It said simply, "When you find the place, do not speak. Just listen." Lucas sat down on the cold stone floor. He closed his eyes again and focused. The hum returned quickly now, like it had been waiting for him to still his thoughts. He breathed slowly, in, and then he heard it. Not a voice, not a language, a sound that formed inside his memory. It was his mother calling his name. Then laughter. Then silence. Then Daniel's voice, quiet and close. "I remember you. You were in the photo. You were small. I asked if I could keep it." The voice faded. The chamber warmed. Lucas opened his eyes. The symbols on the wall had dimmed, but the air felt different. He stood and noticed a small alcove near the far wall that had not been visible before. Inside was a metal tin. He opened it and found a cassette tape and a folded paper. The paper read, "For Lucas. You made it. We are okay. The world we left is louder than we remembered. Keep listening, Gerald." Lucas slid the tape into his recorder. Static filled the space. Then his father's voice. Calm, steady, he spoke of escape, of places not meant to be opened, of a boy who held part of that place in his dreams. He spoke of the decision to disappear, not to abandon, but to shield. He spoke of Lucas, said he had watched from afar, that he had left breadcrumbs only for someone who could see them through emotion, not logic. The voice ended with a single sentence. "We are safe, but the world is fraying. You will know what to do when it touches you." Lucas sat in the chamber long after the tape ended. The hum had faded, but he could still feel it faintly in his bones. He did not know if the chamber would remain open, but he knew now it had opened once for Gerald, and once for him. He stepped back toward the tunnel carrying the photo and the tape. The darkness no longer felt oppressive, just quiet. He knew this was not the end, but something within him had changed. He had stepped through a threshold and returned. Not whole, but awakened. The air above the chamber felt heavier as Lucas emerged. The forest around him had changed subtly. The shadows stretched longer even though the sun had barely moved. He walked back toward his truck, each step echoing louder than it should. The cassette tape and photo were tucked in his jacket, pressed close to his chest. He reached the ranger station by late afternoon and climbed into the cab of his truck without speaking. As he turned the key in the ignition, the radio hissed to life with static. He had not touched the dial. The noise rose for a few seconds, then dropped into silence. Lucas shut it off and pulled away from the station gravel spraying beneath his tires. The road ahead seemed flatter than before. Each mile passed without curve or climb. He felt the distance differently now, not in time but in perception. The boundaries he once trusted felt thinner. The memory of the chamber clung to his senses like dust. He stopped at a gas station in a nearby town. The man behind the counter glanced up from a newspaper and stared at him too long. Lucas asked for directions to the main highway, but the man responded slowly, as if distracted by something beyond the question. Lucas repeated himself. This time, the man blinked and gave clear directions. Lucas nodded and turned to leave, but caught a glimpse of the newspaper's front page. It showed a blurred image of the forest and a headline about unauthorized seismic activity. Lucas asked when it happened. The man said 2 nights ago. Lucas had arrived yesterday. Something had registered before he even entered the chamber. He left quickly, the tape now feeling warmer in his pocket. He checked into a motel by the highway and locked the door behind him. As night fell, he played the cassette again, listening closely for anything he had missed. This time, he noticed a faint sound layered beneath his father's voice. A low tone barely audible, like a continuous breath. Lucas amplified the audio and isolated the frequency. It was not random. It pulsed in rhythm, 5 slow beats followed by silence. Then again, the pattern repeated. He mapped the waveform on his laptop and stared at it. It resembled one of Daniel's symbols, a curved arc with 5 lines beneath it. Lucas remembered what Dr. Marrow had said. Recursion through emotion. He wondered if this pattern could be influencing the world around him. He stepped outside the motel for air. The night felt too still. He looked up and saw a dark strip across the sky where stars should have been. It did not move. It did not shimmer. It simply remained. A hole in the sky. Lucas backed slowly toward the door and entered the room without turning his back to the darkness. Inside, he retrieved Gerald's original notebook. The last pages had symbols like the waveform. Lucas traced the lines with his fingers, comparing them to the audio print. They matched. Gerald had known about the tone. He had heard it too. Lucas flipped through earlier entries and stopped on a drawing he had dismissed before. It showed 2 figures in silhouette, one standing within a circle of rings. The rings pulsed outward like sound. Beneath it, Gerald had written, "When it begins again, the first sign will be sound. The second will be absence." Lucas circled the phrase. The radio static. The silence of the motel room. The blank spot in the sky. It was beginning. He now believed that the chamber had not just revealed truth, it had marked him. Or perhaps it had followed him out. Lucas packed everything and left the motel before dawn. He drove south towards Arizona, hoping the shift in geography would dull the strangeness. But the road remained too quiet. No other cars, no wildlife, just the hum of tires and the growing sense that something was unraveling. He reached the outskirts of Flagstaff and stopped at a diner he remembered from years ago. It was closed. The windows were unbroken, the lights still intact, but no sign of recent life. He stood outside, watching the sky. The dark strip remained a thin line stretching from one horizon to the next, not a shadow, not a cloud. Something else. Lucas began to notice things no longer aligning. Time on his watch moved slower than the car's dashboard clock. Reflections in windows lagged behind his movements. The world was fraying. He called Dr. Marrow. Her voice trembled when she answered. She said she had seen it too. The symbols had begun appearing on her walls. Not drawn, impressed, as if pushed through from the other side. She said she had started dreaming in reverse. She said something was pushing through. Lucas told her about the audio tone. She confirmed it had been theorized as a kind of anchor, a sonic tether. She warned him that once the sound spread, others might begin to feel it too. She asked if he had seen Daniel. Lucas said no, only fragments. She said Daniel might be trying to guide him, or he might be trying to warn him away. Either way, it was coming. Before the line went dead, she whispered something that Lucas could barely make out. The chamber is not where it ends. It is where it wakes. Lucas stood in the motel room walls, silent lights flickering softly. He looked into the mirror above the sink. For a moment, the reflection smiled back before he did, then it matched him again. He stepped back. The mirror fogged. A symbol formed in the condensation, the spiral and the eye. He wiped it clean, but the image lingered faintly beneath the surface. Lucas knew the truth now. He had been marked. The chamber was no longer buried. It had risen, stretched, and threaded itself through memory and perception. Whatever had been trapped in the original shipment had found a path back. Not through tunnels. Not through doors. But through minds. He played the tape again. This time he did not listen to the words. He listened to the rhythm, the tone beneath. It pulsed inside him now, not just in hearing, in feeling. It was there in the way the shadows leaned differently, in the way time bent when he closed his eyes. He wrote a final note in Gerald's journal, a message for whoever might find it after. It read, "I found them, but I also found the path, and now the path has found me." He closed the book and turned out the light. The room faded into gray, and the tone continued. Lucas drove through the morning light with no clear destination. The highway stretched ahead, its lines wavering slightly as if reality itself flickered with uncertainty. The strange tone from the cassette no longer needed a device to be heard. It pulsed softly behind his thoughts, not painful, not intrusive, but constant. It reminded him of breathing, of something that had always been there but now had a name. Every roadside tree and distant horizon shimmered slightly, not visibly distorted, but sensed, as if viewed through memory instead of sight. Lucas knew something had followed him out of the chamber, or perhaps it had always been waiting for someone like him to listen closely enough. He stopped at a rest area overlooking a flat expanse of desert. The sun rose slowly, casting light that looked too clean. He sat on a bench, eyes scanning the landscape. A young boy and his mother exited a minivan nearby, stretching their legs, laughing softly. The boy looked up and met Lucas's eyes. For a moment, his expression froze. Not in fear, in recognition. The boy blinked, then turned and rejoined his mother. Lucas sat still. The tone inside him echoed louder. The boy had felt it, or seen it, and he had recognized that Lucas carried it. He drove again, this time toward the coast. Something in him sought the horizon, a place where land ended and something else began. Along the way, he passed towns where lights flickered in odd rhythm, where mirrors and diners briefly showed different postures before matching the present. People passed him on sidewalks, their eyes momentarily glazing as if caught between moments. The world was folding. Slowly. Gently. But it was happening. And somehow, Lucas understood it was not a destruction. It was a revealing. The echo chamber was not a prison. It was a translation. A way of seeing that only opened when certain minds carried the right silence. He reached the ocean by dusk. The Pacific stretched endlessly before him, reflecting a darkening sky. The line in the heavens still hovered. Thin, perfectly straight. The same absence. He walked along the beach, shoes in hand, the cold water biting at his ankles. The tape from the chamber, now memorized, played again in his thoughts. His father's voice. Calm. Confessing without fear, telling Lucas he had stepped away not to run, but to shield. That some truths needed silence more than revelation. Lucas remembered the photo. His father and Daniel, older untouched by time, standing in that chamber together. They had survived, not just the world, but themselves. And Lucas had found them not in person, but in purpose. He sat on a large driftwood log and pulled out Gerald's notebook one last time. The pages had begun to warp slightly at the edges, as if they too had been touched by the tone. He turned to the first page and read slowly. Each word felt heavier now. His father's handwriting no longer just conveyed message. It carried emotion like sound. Lucas flipped through to the last entry and wrote something new beneath his final note. He wrote that he understood. That silence did not mean absence, that memory could become structure if protected, and that he would listen, even when no one else could hear it. The stars emerged one by one as night fell. Lucas watched the sky shift the black line now pulsing faintly. He closed his eyes and listened. Beneath the waves, beneath the earth, beneath his own breath. The tone continued, but now it carried more. Voices layered beneath it. His father, Daniel, and others. Not in sentences, in memory, in presence. They whispered through feeling, not language. Lucas felt moments that were not his. Fear from a child's eyes. Strength in a father's grip. Relief when the silence became peace instead of terror. He did not know how long he sat there, but when he opened his eyes again, the beach had changed. The tide had drawn back unusually far, exposing patterns in the sand, spirals, arcs, symbols like those in the chamber. Children ran past them unaware. Their laughter did not break the silence. It joined it. Lucas stood and walked toward the water. With each step, the tone shifted slightly, harmonizing. He knew then that this was not an invasion. It was a correction, a soft realignment of the world's forgotten frequencies. The places where memory and reality touched without force. The chamber had not chosen him. It had waited for someone willing to bear witness without trying to own the truth. Lucas watched the horizon fade into night. He thought of his father, of Daniel, of the countless people whose lives had brushed against this hidden reality and moved on without understanding. He no longer felt the need to find them. He had already met them, in the tone, in the silence, in the way the world bent around the right kind of awareness. He pulled out the notebook and left it on the log weighted beneath a smooth stone. Someone would find it. Someone else who felt the world shift too often. Someone who would sit and listen. He walked back toward his truck under a sky that now shimmered where the black line had been. It no longer appeared as absence. It pulsed with faint light like a wound healing. Lucas knew he would keep driving. Not to search, but to stay in motion. The tone would guide him. Not as a curse, but as a thread. And wherever he went, the world would adjust. Sometimes, barely. Sometimes in ways only others like him would notice. But he would be there. A carrier of the echo. A keeper of the silence. Not a prophet, not a guardian, just a witness. In the motel that night, Lucas dreamed of a house with no roof open to the sky. Inside sat Daniel, now older than Lucas remembered, painting the walls with symbols made of light. Gerald sat beside him, silent, watching the stars through the open ceiling. They both looked up as Lucas entered. They smiled without words. And the house breathed, not with wind, but with memory. Lucas woke with tears on his cheeks. He sat for a long time watching the faint shimmer in the dark above his window. He understood now. The chamber had never been a place. It had been a bridge, and he had crossed it. If you enjoyed this mystery and want more stories like it, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Let us know in the comments what you think about the plot and where you're watching from. Your thoughts keep these stories alive.